So here's a little bit about me. As you know, my name is Mary Lee Miller, and I was born and raised in Salt Lake City, Utah. And I've had the incredible privilege to travel the world and live abroad. I lived in Guam and Spain, and I've recently returned to Utah with my husband and our daughter to help care for my aging grandparents. I was first introduced to mindfulness meditation via a practice called the body scan, which you may have heard of, while I was in a residential treatment center when I was 13 years old. So you might have referred to me as a troubled youth or a juvenile delinquent. But I used this practice for years before I realized where it came from. And I actually had no idea how important this experience was. I was raised atheist, but I have always felt a deep spiritual connection to nature. So I started searching for what I was looking for, and I began a deep dive into theology. I read lots of books, I visited various centers for worship, and I found myself most drawn to the Eastern contemplative traditions. So when I was 18 years old, I was invited to my local Zen center by one of my Buddhist friends. And words really fail to describe how profound my experience was that day. I walked through the doors and I arrived late, as I often did back then. And the whole Sangha was sitting zazen. So they're sitting cross legged on the floor. A couple were in chairs, but for the most part, they're on the floor. And there were a lot of them. And they were holding perfectly still and their eyes were closed for an hour. As a neurodivergent individual, I'm diagnosed ADHD. This was absolute torture for me. So I'm not actually sure if at that point I had ever sat perfectly still in my life, but certainly not like this. So it was the longest hour I had ever experienced. And I observed others carefully and I tried my best to fit in. So I started scanning the room and I saw one of them open their eyes. And so I hurried and closed mine because, I wanted them to think I was one of them. I wanted them to think that I was a good meditator. In hindsight, I see how insanely ludicrous this idea was. But despite my agony, there was something about this place that really struck me. I felt it really just deep down in my heart. And it was because of this familiarity, but not in a way like deja vu. This was bigger than that. So it was this feeling of comfort and safety. And I really felt like I had come home. So when the hour that had lasted 9 years came to a close, a man walked through the door and completely turned my understanding of the world upside down. He explained that the only thing that exists is the present moment, and that the past and the future are nothing more than stories we tell ourselves. He explained what a thought was and how to notice the thinking mind, and my mind was absolutely blown because up until that point I didn't know what a thought was. So I continued to attend teachings for a little while and I learned how to practice on my own. But during this time, I became quite the party animal and I was drinking a lot and using a lot of cocaine and other substances. And unfortunately, addiction runs rampant on both sides of my family. And unfortunately, I did not escape it. So during this time, as I was partying, I decided it was a good idea to move to Las Vegas. And of course, I didn't have the support of my spiritual community. So I found community in the bars that I worked at and frequented. I went to culinary school there, and after I graduated, I moved to Guam. And I continued working in bars because it was just better financially than working in restaurants, unfortunately. So I was drinking a lot, and eventually I became a raging alcoholic. And I still practiced, but I was not super disciplined. After a few years, I moved to Florida after I had married my first husband, and I ended up finding a Tibetan Buddhist center. It was called KTC Jax or Karma Tagsum Choling, and it's in Jacksonville. This feeling that I described when I walked into the Zen center in Utah was nothing compared to this. This was exactly what I had been looking for my whole life. I don't know if maybe it was a previous life connection to the Dharma or to Tibetan Buddhism specifically, but that sensation of being home and feeling safe was intense. I took refuge vows under the Karma Kaju lineage, and I officially became a Buddhist. I took refuge again under Lama Thupten Rinpoche in the Nyingma tradition. And throughout this time, I was desperately trying to get sober. I went to rehab twice. I was in and out of AA and therapy for years until I finally realized that none of that was working for me. In 2016, we had moved back to Guam, and I finally got sober in March of 2019. And I did it mostly on my own, with the support of the Buddha Dharma. So when I tell you that these practices changed my life, I mean that with my entire being. I would absolutely be dead without these practices. I began teaching my husband and close friends in an unofficial capacity in 2020. And since then, I've expanded to teach people from all walks of life. I wear many hats. Outside of mindfulness, I'm a mom and a wife and a martial artist and a volunteer coach for the kids' Muay Thai program at my gym. I'm also an artist, a plant nerd, a nature lover. I'm a raver. I'm a traveler. I rock climb. There's so many. So now I want to talk a little bit about my teaching style and who it is that I teach. I'm a mindfulness meditation teacher with my certifications through the Awareness Institute and the Greater Good Science Center of UC Berkeley, which I obtained after completing a 2-year teacher training program with Jack Kornfield and Tara Brock. So I'm authorized to teach what is referred to as secular mindfulness meditation. This means that you don't have to have any specific spiritual beliefs in order to practice this, and it should not conflict with your religious practice or spiritual beliefs if you have any. I teach students of all races, religions, genders, cultural backgrounds, political affiliation, sexual orientation, and people with disabilities and mental health disorders. I do my best to use inclusive language when I teach, but I'm human and I humbly accept that I will inevitably make some mistakes. As such, if you notice something during a teaching that I could have said to make it more accessible, please, please, please take a moment to reach out to me and let me know. I do teach from the heart and from my personal experience, meaning that everything I share with you comes from my decades of practicing as a student. I've been practicing for 27 years. I do tend to be pretty straightforward, and I generally don't like to sugarcoat things to make the truth more palatable. I am very compassionate and empathetic, and I do my best to understand the other person's perspectives before I speak. I tend to take a bit of a more logical and scientific approach to this practice, and I limit the woo talk that is ever present in this space. So even if we have never met, I care deeply about you and your experience as a human being and as my student. Everyone has a different style of learning, and my teaching style is not going to be right for everyone, and that's fine. If it is not right for you, please reach out to me and let me know what it is about the way I teach that's just not resonating with you. And if I can't fix it, I will do my best to pair you up with one of my colleagues who can speak better to your style of learning. I cannot stress enough the importance of finding the right teacher. I promise you will not hurt my feelings. In fact, I'll actually be really grateful for you if you choose to reach out so that I can help you find a better teacher rather than completely abandoning the practice altogether. I'm really looking forward to teaching you.